Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, March 7th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Witkoff says that Trump's threat came after talks with Hamas. So Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy for the Middle East, said Thursday that President Trump's latest ultimatum against Hamas, which included a threat against the people of Gaza, came after the U.S. did not like what it heard in direct talks with the Palestinian group. So Witkoff and other U.S. officials have confirmed that the U.S. has engaged directly with Hamas for the first time through Adam Bowler, President Trump's special envoy for hostage affairs. Witkoff told reporters at the White House, quote, "Unfortunately, what we learned is that Hamas told us they were going to be thinking about it a certain way. That's important information for us to have, and so came the tweet from the president," end quote. So basically saying that threat that I covered yesterday, which included Trump saying that the people of Gaza will be dead if the hostages aren't released, came in response to the talks with Hamas. It also came after Trump met with Israeli hostages. There's also the possibility that it came just as a way to act tough against Hamas in light of these news stories that the U.S. was engaged directly in talks with them. And there was a report from the Times of Israel on Thursday that said Netanyahu was unhappy about the direct U.S.-Hamas talks. And the report also said that the negotiations between the U.S. and Hamas hit a snag due to the leak to the media. And the talks were first reported by Axios reporter Barak Ravid, who is a former IDF intelligence officer. Now, in his report, he cited anonymous sources. He did not say if they were U.S. or Israeli, but I would guess, based on the fact that Israel wasn't too thrilled about the talks, that they felt they were boxed out, that it was an Israeli leak that revealed them to Ravid here. And if you read the report, he also said that Israel was not fully briefed on the talks and that they found out about them through other channels, which sounds like Israel could have learned the details through spying on the U.S. And the focus of the U.S.-Hamas talks has been on the release of Edon Alexander, who's a 21-year-old IDF soldier who has U.S. citizenship. He grew up in New Jersey, and then he moved to Israel after high school to join the Israeli military. He's the only one. Then there's 4 bodies of Israeli hostages who are also had American citizenship. And in his ultimatum to Hamas, Trump said that the group would be over and that the people of Gaza would be dead if the hostages were not released immediately. And the threat came after Trump hosted Israelis who were previously held hostage in Gaza. Witkoff said that the U.S. was still open to dialogue with Hamas, but said that if it didn't work, the alternative was not something that would be good for Hamas. He also hinted at potential military action if they didn't free the hostages and leave Gaza. He said, quote, "It's not clear exactly what's going to happen. Some kind of action will be taken. It could be jointly with the Israelis. It's not clear right now. They're not going to be part of the government there. Everyone understands that. If they understand that, they have a path to leave," end quote. So the U.S. is saying Hamas has got to go. They have to leave Gaza. And Trump said that in his threat. He said the leadership has to go. But also notice what Witkoff said there. He's saying some action might happen and that it could be jointly with the Israelis. And that sounds a lot like he's suggesting the U.S. could take direct military action jointly with Israel. But then he was asked to clarify what he meant by that. And basically what he said, Israel taking action with U.S. support. And the fact is how much support that the U.S. gives Israel, you can consider all of Israel's attacks joint U.S.-Israeli attacks. All their planes are American, not all the bombs, but the vast majority of them are American. So Witkoff said, quote, "Any action really principally comes from the Israelis, but you heard the president say yesterday that he's giving the Israelis anything they need. So it's the Israelis, but with very, very strong physical and emotional support from the U.S., end quote. Hamas also responded to Trump's threat, saying that it complicates the ceasefire efforts They say that they're ready to fulfill, the original ceasefire deal, which Israel is in violation of now by imposing the full blockade on Gaza and demanding they release hostages. And Hamas is saying that they're still saying, at least publicly, that the only way they're going to release the hostages is by going into the second phase, and that's because they want a guarantee Israeli withdrawal and a permanent ceasefire before giving up what leverage that they have left. So hopefully that there still is some kind of talks between the U.S. and Hamas. Witkoff made it sound like the U.S. is open to some kind of deal just between them to get Alexander out, but we'll see if anything happens. All right, so the next one here, new Israeli army chief to present a plan to restart Gaza bombing. So Haaretz, the Israeli paper, reported that the new head of the Israeli military is set to present his plan for the renewal of Israel's campaign in Gaza and operations to retake territory that the IDF left during the first phase of the ceasefire deal. Eyal Zamir was sworn in as the IDF's new chief of staff on Wednesday and vowed that Israel's mission against Hamas has not yet been completed, and other Israeli officials have been threatening to restart the genocidal war at a level not seen before. However, Israeli sources told Haaretz that they doubt the IDF will be able to draft the number of required reservists to enact Zamir's plan, which requires several troops divisions to be deployed across Gaza. The report said that many officers in the reserves have made clear that they would not volunteer to return to combat in Gaza since they think it would only be done for political considerations, essentially so Netanyahu can remain in power. So other sources told Haaretz that the Israeli military could restart combat in Gaza again, but the idea that it would be more intense than before is overblown since the IDF wants to keep its forces ready for the possibility of war with Iran, and the Israeli military is stretched very thin as they've invaded southern Syria. They're continuing to occupy southern Lebanon, and they've really ramped things up over in the West Bank. So the current ceasefire agreement, of course, is hanging by a thread as Israel has imposed this total blockade on all goods entering Gaza. Israel's killed over 100 Palestinians since the truce went into effect on January 19th. And on Thursday, Israel carried out a drone strike in Gaza, killing at least 3 Palestinians. The Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that the drone targeted a gathering of civilians in a neighborhood in Gaza City. And for its part, the IDF claimed that it targeted people planting bombs, but provided no evidence for the claim. So, again, I've seen a lot of this Israeli military sources saying that that the military is not really interested in going back in to Gaza, but there's a lot of political pressure from Netanyahu and his wing to do this. All right, so the next one here. Illegal settlers say that Katz said to behave exactly like Gaza in the West Bank. So this article is from the Palestine Chronicle. It's based on a report in the Washington Post. So an Israeli settler has reportedly said that Defense Minister Israel Katz had assured illegal Jewish settlers that we have to behave exactly like Gaza in the West Bank. According to a report from the Washington Post on Thursday, Israel Gans, the chairperson of an umbrella organization of illegal Jewish settlements in the West Bank, said that he had been pressuring Netanyahu and Smotrich for more than a year to apply the same tactics that the IDF has used in Gaza to the West Bank. Last week, Katz announced the Israeli military offensive launched in the West Bank on January 21st may be ongoing, with the army reportedly expected to remain in the refugee camps for up to a year. Gans said that Katz assured illegal Israeli Jewish settlers that we have to behave exactly like Gaza in the West Bank. And this is, again, according to this report. Gans added, quote, "We have to evacuate the population, clean the area, destroy the terror infrastructure like tunnels, and then anyone who wants to come back can come back," end quote. And Jenin and its refugee camp have been under siege for 45 days. And in the refugee camp specifically, they, forcibly evacuated everybody, destroying the infrastructure. They're also doing that in the Ner Shams refugee camp. You see pictures from there. It looks very similar to Gaza. And again, Katz is saying that they're not going anywhere for the next year. And they're ramping up operations in other parts of the West Bank as well. All right, so the next one here, U.S. B-52 bombers fly with Israeli jets. So a U.S. B-52 Stratro Fortress bomber flew over the eastern Mediterranean Sea on March 4th, marking the third U.S. flyover of the Middle East in the past month. Shows of force that are meant as threats toward Iran and its allies in the region. The Israeli military said in a statement on Thursday, quote, Israeli F-35I and F-15I aircraft flew alongside an American U.S. B-52 strategic bomber. During the flight, the forces practiced operational coordination between the two militaries to enhance their ability to address various regional threats, end quote. U.S. Central Command CENTCOM confirmed that it conducted a bomber task force mission in the Middle East. They said that the B-52, which is capable of carrying nuclear weapons, took off from a base in the UK and flew across Europe on its way to the Middle East. According to Air and Space Forces magazine, the U.S. bomber orbited off the coast of Israel in the eastern Mediterranean, which means it likely flew near or over the besieged Gaza Strip. The flight came just 2 weeks after the U.S. sent two B-52 bombers over the Middle East on February 20th, and that came just a couple days after, on February 18th and February 20th, they did these flyovers. And those ones, it looked like they went over the the allied Arab states in the Middle East. So, when we talk about this is obviously a threat toward Iran. But when you see this kind of rhetoric from Trump talking about opening hell on Gaza, kind of hinting at the U.S. potentially doing something, this could obviously also be taken as a threat to Hamas, to Gaza in general, with, again, all this kind of rhetoric that we've seen. All right, so the next one here, less than half in the U.S. are now sympathetic toward Israelis. So this is a new Gallup poll that found that less than half of Americans are now sympathetic toward the Israelis. So although Americans remain more likely to say their sympathies in the Middle East situation are with the Israelis rather than the Palestinians, the 46% expressing support for Israel is the lowest in 25 years of Gallup's annual tracking of this measure on its World Affairs survey. The previous 51% low point in the trend of American sympathy for Israelis was recorded both last year and in 2001. At the same time, the 33% of U.S. adults who now say they sympathize with the Palestinians is up 6 percentage points from last year and the highest reading by 2 points. And this isn't a surprise considering what people have seen, the footage coming out of Gaza, just kind of the chaos that's been happening in the Middle East. And it's an interesting graph here. It was always the majority of Americans, these polls found, were more sympathetic to the Israelis. The last one last year was 51%, and then this year it goes down to 46%. And, I do really think when it comes, in the long term, when it comes to U.S. support for Israel, I think Israel really is in trouble because you see among younger people, Gen Z and millennials, it doesn't really matter where they are on the political spectrum. They are much more likely to be skeptical of this relationship between the U.S. and Israel. And here's more evidence, again, that Israel's in trouble in the long term when it comes to this kind of unconditional, blind support that it gets from the U.S. All right, so the next one here, UK Storm Shadow missiles are now useless for Ukraine. So the Daily Mail reported on Thursday that Ukraine's British-provided Storm Shadow missiles are likely to be useless now that the U.S. has paused intelligence sharing with the Ukrainian military. The report said the UK is among several countries that have received orders from the U.S. prohibiting the sharing of U.S.-generated intelligence with Ukraine. The Storm Shadow missiles, which have a range of about 155 miles, rely on U.S. satellite data to be fired. Last year, Ukraine began firing Storm Shadows and U.S.-provided ATACMS missiles into Russia, marking a significant escalation of the proxy war that risked provoking a direct clash between the U.S. and Russia. When we talk about the risks of this turning into a direct war, which of course would quickly lead to a nuclear war, these attacks, these long-range missile attacks in Russia, were the biggest risk. And Russia made that very clear, that the way that they viewed these attacks as such a big escalation. According to a report from Axios, the pause on intelligence sharing was focused on information that Ukraine could use to launch attacks inside Russian territory. So that kind of suggests, saying the focus of the pause is on attacks inside Russia, suggests that maybe they're not in pausing all intelligence sharing. And the Daily Mail report said that the Storm Shadows have been a critical asset for Ukraine in its assault on Russia's Kursk Oblast. So besides the satellite data, the U.S. has other intelligence capabilities inside Ukraine, since the CIA has been deeply embedded in the country, and that presence began significantly building up following the 2014 U.S.-backed coup that ousted former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. Both the New York Times and the Washington Post had pretty major reports on this in the past year about how the U.S. helped build up the Ukrainian intelligence agencies, how the CIA did, and how it established all these essentially bases in eastern Ukraine. And the British were very involved. MI6 was involved in this stuff as well. So U.S. officials have said that the pauses on U.S. military and intelligence sharing will be lifted once Ukraine shows its readiness to engage with Russia on peace talks to end the war. And U.S. and Ukrainian officials are meeting in Saudi Arabia next week to discuss this stuff. All right, so the next one here, Ukrainian envoy to the UK says that the U.S. is destroying the world order. So this is Valery Zaluzhny, the former Ukrainian commander-in-chief who now serves as the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK. He has said that the U.S. is destroying the world order in comments critical of the Trump administration's approach toward the war. Speaking at a conference hosted by a think tank in the UK, Zaluzhny said the actions of the U.S. under President Trump have called into question the unity of the whole Western world. He said, quote, "We see that it is not just the axis of evil and Russia trying to revise the world order, but the U.S. is finally destroying this order," end quote. Zaluzhny added that the Trump administration's diplomacy with Russia was a sign that the U.S. was taking steps toward the Kremlin. So these comments came after the U.S. paused military aid and intelligence sharing, which he said was a huge challenge for the entire world. In recent days, Zelensky has been taking a conciliatory tone toward the Trump administration to unfreeze U.S. support. And according to Politico, the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry is distancing itself from Zaluzhny's remarks, saying that it was just his personal opinion. So it's interesting to hear this coming from Zaluzhny because he's always been long believed to be a potential presidential candidate if Ukraine ever has elections. There was a poll last year in 2024 that found 41% of Ukrainians would favor Zaluzhny in a first-round election, while only 23.7% would vote for Zelensky. So there's indications that he would beat Zelensky. And I think if any kind of election happens now, Zelensky doesn't really have a chance, I would guess. And so maybe this is him trying to, act tough toward the Americans as part of some kind of political strategy here, potentially. And this is something the U.S. wants Ukraine to hold elections. We actually have there's another report from Politico saying that U.S. officials have met with some Ukrainian opposition figures that they really want elections to happen. It looks like the U.S. wants to get Zelensky out of there. All right, so the next one here, State Department to use AI to target pro-Palestine protests. So this is a really scary story here. So Axios reported on Thursday that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is launching an AI-driven effort to revoke the visas of foreigners in the U.S. who appear pro-Hamas in a crackdown targeting pro-Palestine protests on college campuses. So the report said that the effort will involve AI-assisted reviews of social media accounts of tens of thousands of foreign students in the U.S. on visas that will look for evidence of alleged terrorist sympathies expressed after Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. And so you hear this language in this report. They're going to take visas away from foreigners who appear to be pro-Hamas or if there's evidence of terrorist sympathies, very vague definitions here. And this is a sign that basically any foreign students who attend pro-Palestine protests or who express sympathy for Palestinians online could be swept up in this crackdown, because opponents of the Israeli siege on Gaza, of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory, or simply opponents of the U.S. funding Israel, of U.S. military aid to Israel, they get called pro-Hamas all the time. And I know from experience, people call me that literally every day online, some version of that. just because I oppose my government supporting what Israel's been doing. And, and we see this rhetoric from all sorts of figures in the Trump administration. And of course, you think this is going to just stop at foreign students, that they're not going to use these tools to look at Americans, the social media of Americans and put them on some kind of list. I mean, this has just really scary implications here. And civil liberty groups have strongly criticized President Trump's promises to deport foreign students who attend these protests, because the First Amendment is supposed to protect the speech of foreigners in the U.S., of anybody inside the U.S. So there's a lot of opposition to this, of course. And this new State Department project is part of a broader administration effort against protests that are critical of Israel, which includes threats from President Trump that universities that allow what he called illegal protests would lose federal funding. The DOJ launched a new task force investigating these alleged incidents of anti-Semitism. Of course, they label all these protests anti-Semitic, even though there's many Jewish students and organizations involved in them. This stuff just is very, and the AI aspect of it is really creepy, because, there's all this kind of surveillance state stuff being built using AI, and Israel's been using it a whole bunch in Gaza to massacre people on a very large scale. So this just has all sorts of creepy implications, I think. And, you see people who support this and say, this will just target people who are violent. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying anyone who expresses sympathies for Hamas. And there are already laws. If you're a foreign student here on a visa and you break the law, you vandalize property or you hurt somebody, you're going to get deported. That things that are illegal. This is clearly targeting these protests because they are critical of Israel on behalf of a foreign nation. And it's just completely outrageous. All right, so the next one here, Pentagon awards contract for AI war planning tool. So another AI story. This one's from Kyle Anzalone. So the U.S. Department of Defense has awarded a contract to scale AI to integrate artificial intelligence into military operational and theater level planning. According to the Defense Innovation Unit, the AI system dubbed Thunder Forge will accelerate decision-making, allowing planners to more rapidly synthesize vast amounts of information, generate multiple courses of action, and conduct AI-powered wargaming to anticipate and respond to evolving threats. The AI will initially be deployed to the Indo-Pacific Command and European Command theaters. The DIU did not disclose how much scale AI would be paid to develop Thunder Forge, but added that the system would also make use of Anduril's Lattice program and state-of-the-art LLMs enabled by Microsoft. Again, the weaponization of AI is very scary. We don't really know exactly. They're saying this is going to be used for decision-making. I think the whole thing just, again, kind of freaks me out. Not AI in general. I think it's a very useful tool for things, but again, the militarization of it, just don't like. All right, so the next one here, Trump says that everybody should get rid of nukes, which sounds great to me. So this is another one from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. So President Donald Trump restated his desire to abolish nuclear weapons during a White House presser on Thursday. He said, quote, "It would be great if everybody would get rid of their nuclear weapons. I know Russia and us have by far the most. China will have an equal amount within 4 to 5 years. It would be great if we could all denuclearize because the power of nuclear weapons is crazy," end quote. And he said this before, that China is going to be caught up in 4 to 5 years. That's not true at all. Both the U.S. and Russia have something, counting nuclear warheads that they have retired that they say are ready to be destroyed. They each have over or around 5,000 nuclear warheads. China's estimated to have like 600, and the Pentagon's claiming that they could have up to 1,000 in like 5 years or 1,500, which, that would be a big increase, but still wouldn't be close to what the U.S. and Russia have. But anyway, so Trump's been saying this. I mean, this is like the third time I think I've heard him say this recently, which again sounds great, but then he's also taking steps that's ratcheting up the arms races, like his order for the missile defense program and everything. So this is one of those things, this is what he's saying, but on the other hand, he's taking these steps to actually increase the military budget when he's talking about cutting military budgets and ramp up arms races by ordering this new major missile defense system. All right, so the next one here, France is considering extending nuclear deterrence to all of Europe. This is another one from Kyle. He's been a busy man lately. French President Emmanuel Macron is leading a group of European leaders who are highly concerned that President Donald Trump may not continue to fund the proxy war in Ukraine and defend NATO if one of the members are attacked. Speaking during a televised address on Wednesday, Macron said that, quote, "Our nuclear deterrent protects us. It is comprehensive, sovereign, and French through and through. I have decided to open the strategic debate on protection through deterrence for our allies on the European continent." End quote. France is one of the 3 NATO members with nuclear weapons, the US, the UK, and France, and they're the only state in the European Union to have a nuclear arsenal. Macron said that the discussions were needed due to the alleged threat posed by Russia and questioned whether the US would come to Europe's aid if there was an invasion. He said, quote, "Russia has become a threat to France and Europe for years to come. I want to believe that the United States will remain by our side, but we need to be ready if that were no longer the case. The future of Europe should not be decided in Washington or Moscow," end quote. So on one hand, I like this talk about the Europeans saying that they don't think they can rely on the U.S. because it makes it more likely that NATO could be abolished one day. Not that I think that that's going to happen anytime soon, but you never know. But on the other hand, they're all taking these steps, kind of a rapid militarization of Europe. And they're all saying that Russia's this big threat. And, that could also just lead to war, because that's what happens. If you create an enemy and you militarize, you usually end up in a war, or another war could start. So, that's concerning at the same time. So hopefully, there is some kind of peace deal in Ukraine and that it just eases tensions in general. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov responded sharply to Macron's comments, calling them stupid, while warning that Russia viewed the statement as a threat. He said, quote, "If he considers us a threat, calls a meeting of the chiefs of general staff of European countries and Britain, says that it is necessary to prepare for the use of nuclear weapons against Russia, this is, of course, a threat," end quote. All right, so the next one here, Sudan launches a case against the UAE at the ICJ. So this article is from Middle East Eye. So Sudan has filed an application to open proceedings against the United Arab Emirates before the International Court of Justice over alleged complicity in acts of genocide against the Masalit community, the court said on Thursday. The application concerns acts adopted, condoned, taken, and being taken by the government of the UAE in connection with the genocide against the Masalit group in the Republic of Sudan since at least 2023. Khartoum said that it had brought the proceedings over alleged violations by the UAE and its obligation under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, also known as the Genocide Convention. It said the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group and allied militias had perpetrated genocide, murder, theft, rape, and forcible displacement, and was enabled to do so by direct support from the UAE. Sudan contended that the UAE was complicit in the genocide on the Masalit through its direction of and provisions of extensive financial, political, and military support for the rebel RSF militia. So I know the UAE has been sending weapons to the RSF. And, there's been atrocities committed by both sides, the Sudanese army and the RSF in this war. From what I've seen, I don't know too much about the conflict, but it looks like the RSF has committed way more massacres and mass rapes and things like that. And this is something Tony Blinken accused the RSF of genocide during one of his last days in office. But at the same time, the U.S. just recently, under Blinken's watch, advanced a big weapons sale to the UAE, who's arming the RSF. So this is another U.S. ally being accused of complicity in a genocide at the ICJ. All right, so the next one here, Trump delays some tariffs on Mexico and Canada. So this one's from AP. I was going to write something about this, but the tariff stuff just changes so much. I just was afraid that tomorrow it would be a completely obsolete story. So the other day, the tariffs, the 25% tariffs went into effect on Mexico and Canada. But now Trump has postponed 25% tariffs on many of the imports from Mexico and some of the imports from Canada for a month amid widespread fears of the economic fallout from a broader trade war. The White House insists that its tariffs are about stopping the smuggling of fentanyl, but the taxes proposed by Trump have caused a gaping wound in the decades-old North American trade partnership. In addition to his claims about fentanyl, Trump has insisted that the tariffs could be resolved by fixing the trade deficit, and he emphasized while speaking in the Oval Office that he still plans to impose reciprocal tariffs starting on April 2nd. So he's saying that this is another 30-day extension for, again, most of the products that come from Mexico and some that come from Canada. And these are products, imports under the USMCA trade pact that the U.S. signed with Canada and Mexico back in 2020 in Trump's first term. And if my numbers are right, they have it in here. So 62% of the imports from Canada will still face the new tariffs. And I believe with Mexico, it's something like 49% are still going to face tariffs. All right, so the last story here, South Korea, 15 hurt by bombs during U.S. war games. So this is another one from Kyle. U.S. and South Korean forces conducting live fire war games over the Korean peninsula accidentally dropped 8 500-pound bombs on a South Korean city, wounding more than a dozen people. According to unnamed South Korean officials who spoke with the press, 2 South Korean F-16 aircraft dropped 8 Mark 82 500-pound bombs on a populated area on Thursday. Thank God nobody was killed, but 15 people were injured. I mean, you see this video here. These look like some pretty serious bombing that occurred here during these big U.S.-South Korean war games. So there's been a whole bunch of war games lately between the U.S. and South Korea. And the city was outside of the training grounds that were the intended target. Seoul said one of its pilots used incorrect coordinates and instead bombed a civilian area. The source did not provide an explanation for the second aircraft also bombing beyond the target zone. So it was actually 2 jets that did this, and U.S. and South Korean warplanes were conducting live fire exercises ahead of the annual Freedom Shield drills, which are intended as a show of force against North Korea, of course. All right, so that is it for the news. Again, another big day of news. So much going on, and we have so much stuff in the lower part of the page. There's so much stuff I would like to cover and write about, but it's just, I got to really pick and choose what I think is the most important thing for us to be focused on here. But just so much stuff happening around the world. So go check out our Viewpoints. One from Scott Horton, how Biden botched the chance to end the war in Ukraine. One from Noam Yonai, why I refuse to be a cog in Israel's war machine. One from John Perry, biased UN report on Nicaragua ignores victims of U.S.-backed opposition violence. One from Andy Corbley, China's 6th-generation warplane set to outgun the U.S. Air Force. And one from Doug Bandow, Zelensky's NATO illusion. Speaking of China, one thing we have in our frontline section that I wanted to mention is that Chinese warships have been circumnavigating Australia. They held some drills, very far off the coast, but, much closer to Australia than China. And then they went south. They sailed near Perth. I think they're still a few hundred miles away from the coast. But it's clearly a response to Australia has been engaging in military drills in the South China Sea and just Australia's cooperation with the U.S. in general. That, we're seeing responses to that from China. They're kind of making their Navy more present in these areas of the Pacific. So anyway, that's it for me for today. That's it for the week. I hope everybody has a good weekend. I'm sure I'm going to have a crazy number of things to catch up on after this weekend. Just seems like so much is happening all the time. But you could always support us by liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting. Follow us on social media. I will be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.